Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Distribution Maintainers Meeting for November 23rd, 2021. And let's jump into it. We don't currently have any topics on the agenda, but we do have some maintainer discussion issues pulled in. Before we jump into those, was there any other topic that anyone had on their mind that they wanted to throw in to the topic section before we jump in to the discussion issues?
Yeah, I just dropped in yesterday in the team call. Dimitro had discussed the common line. I can't remember the exact term, but we created an issue to talk about leaving feedback. And so I wanted to just share it because there's some folks maybe in this call that weren't in the other one. Encourage folks to add comments.
Yeah, I think for now, the ask there is to add comments there, Stephen. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had a hard time spitting it out, but yeah, that's the idea. Is there a link? Yeah, the conventional comments. That's the term I was looking for. So yeah, we don't have to discuss it. I just wanted to raise it for folks that might not have been aware of it yesterday.
Yep. Does anyone have any other topics they wanted to throw on before we jump to maintainer discussion items? If not, we can jump into those. So under the maintainer discussion issues header, of course, we have a link to a bunch of maintainer discussion items. As always, I encourage you throughout the week to take a look at those and leave your feedback on particularly the recent ones, but we want to always also be cleaning up some of the old ones as well. But two new ones that have come in over the past 2 weeks have been, the first one was from yesterday from Dimitro, reviewing the possibility of skipping the review and QA stages in dev.gitlab.org. I think this is for the operator.
Yeah, but in general, I think it may expand beyond the operator as well. And that is, how much of a pipeline do we want to run in dev, considering that we're running pretty extensive pipelines in GitLab.com. So like we came across it with the GitLab operator because we noticed that we're actually pulling the wrong images. And once we fix the issue with the wrong images, now the pipeline is breaking. But like it does take an additional effort to maintain the infrastructure in dev, and then the question arises whether that infrastructure is warranted at all, because like why do we need to maintain it if we're not getting any additional functionality or additional value out of that? But again, it could be that I'm not seeing the value. That's why it's been raised for review and discussion rather than just let's just disable it.
So at least for the review, in my opinion, it's one of those things where we have to make sure that we're still doing our due diligence for those things that may not necessarily get built on GitLab.com. If they are built on GitLab.com, that we need to make sure that they actually are active in all aspects of that, which can be pre-release pipelines. It could be security pipelines. There's a number of factors that come into play there. To be fair, I also don't know that all of these are addressed now for all of our actual projects. So that might be worth some evaluation just to be sure. But I'm definitely not necessarily turning down all of them on dev, but at least because of pre-release pipelines, I'm a little concerned.
Yeah, that's fair. It's like, again, I took it in the broad sense in the end, even though it started with the GitLab operator, because I imagine that, like you said, we do have some other pipelines that are running steps that may not be doing much for us in the dev, or maybe they are and we're just not paying attention. And that's the flip side of that coin. Because most of the stuff that we're doing, for example, with the GitLab operator, what brought this up, it was the stuff that we're not touching any, like the review and QA stages in dev, just repeat the same thing that just happened in GitLab.com. Do we view it as valuable or do we not?
Yeah, I think it's valuable to be running something in dev. Maybe not at the moment in the operator, but I think as we move more and more actually this might already be the case. I'm not sure which one the releases are happening from for the operator yet. But for most of our other projects, the build and release phases happen in dev. And a lot of the other projects, dev actually doesn't run QA. It often does run the review environments, like for CNG, it does run a single review environment, but only for stable branches, for example. It doesn't do it for anyone's feature branches or anything like that. So only for stable branches. And then most of the other projects also have a security fork on GitLab.com to address the security pipelines. So the security forks are often where now that we've moved them to .com, that's where we get QA runs and like the fuller test runs back again as well. But obviously we don't have that yet for the operator, and even that the security fork we don't have for the Helm chart either.
So from what I'm hearing is there is perceived value in having those stages on dev as well as .com. Like, or am I misreading this?
I think there's value in still having some, but only for certain branches, and it being a pared down version. But the value is only like there may not be value in the operator right now, though, right? Like we're not doing anything with dev. I'm not sure if we are or not. Maybe Mitch could speak to that.
Not quite there yet, I don't think.
Yeah, so right now it truly is just a waste of effort then. But if our intent is to do the releases from dev, we should probably do some release validation at least.
So what I think we should do is, first off, we should make sure that we actually evaluate all of the projects and ensure that they have a reason to be running things on dev and what scale they should be running it at. A little more information makes sense. From there, in the very least, we should probably reduce it down to the stable trees, and for the sake of delivery in some point, the auto deploy tags. If not the auto deploy branches, at least the auto deploy tags. But as said, we don't need to have every single branch running over there for sure. That's probably a strong waste that we can clean up. From there, we'll know from that investigation, we'll have an idea of which things do or do not actually need to be there. So don't get me wrong. I wasn't challenging in any way that we should look into this. It's more, there are valid reasons. We need to figure out which ones are applying here.
Oh yeah, no, I wasn't taking it as a challenge. It was more like, again, I may see the limited context and I needed more context.
Yeah, the general context is just to reduce dependency on .com, right? Don't use GitLab to deploy GitLab. I think in this case with the operator, it's a slightly different scenario where we actually do use .com to release because we put those artifacts, those manifests in the GitLab.com releases page, whereas like charts and Omnibus go to different package repositories. So slightly different for the operator, but obviously still having things on dev can be helpful, especially if .com runs into an issue. We should still be able to do things on dev, but we definitely do have that inherent dependency on .com just because that's where people will be pulling the release artifacts.
So should we then reach kind of a parity on the operator as well and move things over to the dev?
Well, I think in the end, users will always want to pull them from .com. They won't have access to dev to pull those manifests, but I remember there being enough good reason to make these CI clusters in dev. Maybe Blue has more context on that. I personally haven't seen a lot of dev workflows especially with releases, just because I haven't been involved in those. So maybe there's more context that I'm missing on that. But in my opinion, dev's not really offering us anything right now. So if we could maybe just disable the dev pipelines, that would help us at least not have to waste time fixing failures in CI, for example, and we can re-enable it when we have a clear picture of why it's there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
So I'm guessing what we're saying also is that not until the .com is going to start using operator for deployment are we running the danger of not deploying over, like not running the full pipelines in dev, more or less. It's like
I would
very
disagree because of
oversimplified.
security.
Sorry?
I would disagree because of security.
Oh,
Right. So in that aspect, like I said, that's one of the things that we want to care about is where does security get run, right? We need those pipelines to run in a private instance, to say the least. We have a private section. We're not currently in that kind of thing, but it needs to be addressed at some point in the meantime. I'm not saying that until GitLab.com uses the operator, we don't need dev. I'm actually saying we should make sure that there are certain things that GitLab.com will eventually use prepared in dev. We do want to get the operator release in line with the rest of the releases. And to do that, it has to be on dev.
okay. So we start with a limited capacity pipelines on dev, and then we'll move on. That's my reading of what you said, Jason, right?
Okay, so we can start by investigating exactly what we need on dev right now, pairing back to that, and then making the plan that's actually needed to get release pipeline parity in the operator, and then working on that. So we need to do some research to find out exactly what we do need on dev right now. We then need to figure out which things we have in excess, then remove that excess, then identify those things that are different between the parity of release process between the charts, CNG, and the operator, and start implementing those on dev. We're talking about probably a dozen issues.
Right, so it's probably worth opening the Epic for that, I'm guessing.
Probably worth opening an epic for that. That'll probably turn into 4 or 5 sub epics. Yeah.
Gotcha. I think that's it for me.
Yeah, we can jump into the next one. So the next maintainers discussion issue thrown on here was one from, I think, just over a week ago from Marcel. Consider re-enable shared runners in the project settings. There's already been a lot of discussion on this one, and Jason's already thrown out a lot of feedback on it. I think I just wanted to re-raise it here. I think probably and I'll throw a comment in there. I think the path forward here is probably to update our CI to pare down what forks end up running for charts. By that, I mean, being that the forks don't have access to our CI resources, and it's not like our Kubernetes CI resources specifically is what we're referring to. It doesn't really make sense for it to be even trying to use those, I think, for the community fork. So probably the path forward, or the proposal, my proposal would end up being, that we tackle ensuring that those resources are only part of our .com forks, and that way, when community members fork the project, the things that can run on the shared runners, such as maybe the specs without cluster and the doc reviews and linters, can still run.
Makes sense.
I'll throw a comment on there to that effect.
I'm kind of surprised forking inherits the shared runner setting at all.
Yeah, it inherits a bunch of, it inherits all the project defaults. when you fork. So any like visibility or what's turned on and off in the general project settings, those the toggle list itself of like what's on and what visibility level are used as the default for the new project being created during the forking process.
But you could still turn on shared runners if you wanted after
Yep.
forking.
Yep.
Got it. So they're not blocked from it, but okay, good to know.
Yeah, it's usually often in different projects we turn them on just so there's not that extra back and forth of, oh, can you enable the shared runners?
While we're on this topic too, I have a feeling I might be working this too hard. When I get a merge request from a fork and I'm ready to run a full pipeline on .com, I'm actually cloning that project and then adding it upstream and pushing it upstream. Is there a faster way to do that in the UI that I'm missing? Or is that the workflow?
I don't know if there's a faster way to do it in the UI. You don't have to like clone the whole project, but you do need to at least fetch the branch. So in the UI, there's that checkout branch, and it does give you the fetch for your local that will at least get that branch locally into yours without adding a long-term remote to the community members project. But yeah, as far as I know, that is, yeah, that's the approach I take as well. I say grab that branch locally and then push it up. Being it's such a common workflow for all of GitLab, you would think we would have added something for it already.
Yeah, it seems doable.
Or even like a slash command or something.
Yeah, something that only the project members could run when they're comfortable allowing a full pipeline to run.
Yeah. Just running through the agenda a little further, and then we can open up to anything else. So the other item on the agenda under the Omnibus MRs recently merged. So these are this first section is often for things that have already been and should have been already announced in the maintainers discussion channel. And we're just resurfacing them here again, just as an announcement. So from Balu, he merged merge request from Robert and myself around using the public sources by default now in Omnibus. So it used to be everything in Omnibus. If you checked it out locally or someone else forked it, it defaulted to using dev for all of its resources, and you had to like export alternate sources equal true to, and then run things if you wanted to run it locally or if community members had to run it. We flipped that now on its head. So it's the exact opposite. It defaults to always using public sources, and only dev itself needs to set the flag alternate sources explicitly to false, for example. And if you did want to test dev specifically, you would just do the same thing, explicitly set it to false and run. But for most cases, this is much better. And the specific issue we were resolving recently is we've been doing a lot of Omnibus version changes, and the Omnibus gem we normally check out from dev, and that's kind of committed to our gem file.lock, and constantly updating that version creates conflicts with downstream users fairly frequently of that gem lock file, where normally they'd just be able to take the version change, but because they've had to set that Omnibus location to be somewhere other than dev, there ends up being a file conflict rather than just a smooth accepting of upstream revisions. So that's been hitting recently. It's been hitting the Jihu team probably every week as we make Omnibus changes, and have been bumping the version around Omnibus license updates, and their mirror has been kind of breaking every week. So this should hopefully resolve that and make one less step for all the rest of us when we're running a local build. Was there any other anything else anyone wanted to talk about during the maintainers meeting today?
If we've got a couple minutes, it might be a good forum to talk about the Kubernetes 122 upgrade. I put a link back in the topics at the top. It came up in discussion about an operator MR that Hussein has opened to add support for the Kubernetes 122 API. I put in there a suggestion to think about blocking that on the Nginx MR. I only bring that up because that MR and the operator is pretty huge, which is not necessarily bad. It's just a lot of changes to happen in one MR. And if it doesn't necessarily get us 122 support because Nginx still won't work on 122, I figured if we can wait for the Nginx MR to go in, that actually forces us to support at least 119, which actually makes the MR itself in the operator a lot cleaner. There's less logic happening and less support going on. So it's not, I guess it's not necessary to support, to block on the Nginx MR, but if we merge the one the operator, we're not getting a lot of value out of it because we still can't actually deploy the operator and GitLab on 122 until Nginx is merged anyway. So I didn't really want to rush merging an MR that's pretty huge and needs to be tested on multiple versions until it actually supports the newer version. So just looking for feedback on that.
Yeah, does merging that actually break the usage of older versions of Nginx?
I don't believe it does. It just won't support pulling in like extensions v1 version of the ingress.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't believe it would break anything, but I could double check that.
I don't think so either. It's like, I haven't actually
Depends on that backwards compatibility. Yeah. A lot of version maps going around, but yeah.
Just as a thought and just immediate thought rather than deep one, perhaps it's worth releasing it now in a sense, merging it now, because we will have the time to actually investigate the backward compatibility, because we will have clients with lower than 122 and see how that portion of it behaves, and then schedule another ticket for testing it against the 122 stability, 122 and up. Just a suggestion. Like I said, it's not a deep thought. It's just something that occurred.
Yeah, it's definitely another approach because that MR really just updates the APIs that get used within the operator. I think good point, Jason. We say we support back to 116. So what I should do is spin up a 116 cluster and see if this MR works on that. If the 122 API can reach back that far, because that would obviously be another good reason to wait until the Nginx MR goes in and we bump up the minimum Kubernetes version we support.
Right, and that's kind of a thing. DJ, go ahead if you want to.
I was just going to say, so for the operator, we're still enabling it to support an additional 2 versions back of the charter, right? Is that correct?
Right.
So we would still need, even if we released the Nginx one, it would still be another 2 releases before that would be the minimum chart supported by the operator, I think, right?
Right. What I will say though is the operator, technically we're testing it at lower versions, but our 4.6, 4.7, and 4.8 clusters are 19, 20, and 21. So in reality, the operator is not necessarily being tested on anything near 116. So there's that kind of caveats that's in there.
About charts, right?
No, I'm literally talking about the operator itself, because we're testing on OpenShift 4.6, 4.7, and 4.8. 4.9 is 122, 4.6 is 119. So we have it on an EKS cluster, but what version is the EKS cluster running in? I can bet you it's not 116, because they'd be screaming at us, upgrade your cluster. So we may want to just be like, hey, it's time to upgrade your required version for the operator. And we're going to have to do that when we merge Nginx anyways. There's right now no way around it, unless we go to an older version than what we have selected right now. And from what I can tell, I don't think there's a transitionary period where you get support of 116 through 120 something. So I don't think there's a way around that, which, to be fair, as discussed in this MR, I think, was like, it's going to roll out by January. Nobody's going to support the older version anyways.
Right. So with that on the heels, I would just figured we may as well just kind of wait on that operator MR because Nginx is going to force us into the future, and that makes Hussein's MR a lot cleaner. He can actually revert a couple commits and just fewer opportunities for failure and logic complexity in there. So
You might not have to wait though. You could maybe just bump the operator min Kubernetes version to 119 earlier, particularly if
option two.
like perhaps it's not even already working on 116.
Right. And that is the other thing I was leaning towards, is we don't specifically have to bind the operator minimum version to the minimum version of the chart. It's newer, it's smaller. We can deal with the fact that we've got a slightly tighter window for the time being. And, you know, it may come to that point where we need to have more than, I should say less than 3, but more than 1. So we may have to go to 2 supported versions of the chart instead of 3 at some point, just to cross that boundary of supported versions. But we will get there.
Yeah, if that accomplishes the goal too. If we can just say the operator has a min 119, then Hussein's MR still gets smaller, which in my opinion is good. So if we're comfortable with that, we could definitely move forward there, especially since we're not testing on those versions anyway. Cool. I will put that in the MR notes and we can move forward. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So we're just about at time. Any last closing thoughts? If not, thanks everyone for your time, and we'll see you again in this meeting, perhaps in another 2 weeks. Yep. Okay. Have a good day.